Hi guys, it's Emma. I'm going to talk about the judicial branch, the third branch of the government. The judicial branch is the branch of the U.S. government concerned with interpreting the laws created by the legislative branch and overturning laws that are not constitutional. It consists of a system of federal courts and judges. The Constitution was very broad and vague about the judicial branch's power, so over time it has evolved and come into its own. At the top of the judicial branch sits the Supreme Court, the most powerful court in the U.S. It consists of 9 judges who are appointed by the current president, and then the nominations must be confirmed by the Senate. There's an odd number to prevent ties. Once appointed, these justices serve for life to eliminate bias so they aren't swayed into voting a certain way to get reelected. The main power of the Supreme Court is judicial review, which is the process of deciding whether a law is constitutional or not and declaring a law void if it is found to be in conflict with the Constitution. This is a key component of checks and balances, because by doing this, they check the legislative branch. Most cases heard by the Supreme Court are appeals, which is when a lower court applies to a higher court for a reversal of the decision. These are just a few examples of some of the most important Supreme Court rulings in history, just to give you an idea of how influential its rulings are and how they can affect our everyday life. The first example, Brown v. Board of Education in 1954 declared that segregation of schools was unconstitutional. This was a big moment for the civil rights movement. Then there's Miranda v. Arizona in 1966, where law enforcement officers must remind people of their rights as they're being arrested. You may have heard of Miranda rights or seen them said in movies. It's, you have the right to remain silent, etc. And then there's Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015, which declared that gay couples have the right to be married. This was a decision that legalized gay marriage everywhere in the U.S. Under the Supreme Court, but also part of the judicial branch, is a system of federal courts, which is pretty complex and confusing, so I'll just give a general idea of how it works, which you can see in this diagram. The yellow shows courts that review cases for the first time, and blue shows courts that look at appeals. Cases typically start out in a state court if state law applies, or a federal court if federal law applies. If these are appealed, they go through the United States Court of Appeals. This is the level below the Supreme Court. There's also a Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. After that, cases finally go to the Supreme Court if they choose to look at it. Only a tiny percentage of cases finally make it all the way up there. Don't worry about how all this works. Just remember that the purpose of the judicial branch is to interpret the laws and to set standards for how they should be applied across the country.